This is 7 Minutes Cyber with Danny Lawler of Quest and myself, Sam Glynn of Code in Motion. And the 7 minutes start now.
So Sam, 2 days ago, I got a text message purported to be from AIB Bank with a link asking me to follow through and give them some data. Seems to be a fairly unsophisticated phishing attempt. But Sam, there are much more sophisticated ways that cyber criminals are out there looking to threaten regulated firms. What's the most sophisticated attack that you've seen in the last 6 months?
I suppose two come to mind. There's one that I recently dealt with a client where it was a relatively straightforward phishing email, but the difference with it was they had done a bit of information gathering about the individual they were targeting and about the individual that they engage with. So they were able to kind of suggest, that the person they were pretending to be was this individual's superior. They kind of applied a bit of an urgency around the request they were making, but there was nothing very malicious in the mail itself. They were just trying to start a conversation. And I found that interesting because it just showed that they weren't just doing phishing, with that big net on the back of a boat and just sending out emails to random people. They were doing what is called spear phishing, where they targeted an individual. They were really targeting that individual. They had done a bit of work to try to fool that individual into responding and getting into a conversation. And luckily enough, the training that individual had received, the awareness that was there, ensured that attempt failed pretty immediately. But it was interesting in that it was a little bit more sophisticated than your standard, I'm a Nigerian prince, I've got $50 million that I want to give you. I think in terms
of what were
they
trying to achieve there, Sam?
Well, it's difficult to know for sure until you get into the conversation with them. But what I would imagine they were looking to do was eventually fool the recipient into authorizing a payment to a bank account that they had control over. That was pretty much how it works. Other emails may be where they try to get you to download a file which has malicious content and then kicks off a ransomware attack or whatever like that. But this did look like, because the individual that was targeted, they were pretty senior in the organization, likely to have higher authorized limits for making payments, likely to be involved in sensitive business matters, possibly under pressure anyway. Was potentially a good target if they didn't have an awareness of the types of attacks that they could be subjected to. In the broader sense of things, there are a lot of attacks reported in the paper and they're all reported as sophisticated. Most of them aren't. But even those that aren't necessarily sophisticated, they can be quite interesting to look at. And the one that comes to mind is one that was perpetrated against Norwegian state investment fund, Norfund. And the last I heard, they had lost $10 million as a result of the scam. Now, they haven't quite open about what happened to them and how it happened, but they're not necessarily revealing all the details. So I'm not suggesting that they fell foul of, obvious things and that they weren't doing what they could do. But having said that, they had some kind of an attack which started with, it is believed, a phishing email that went to the right person. That resulted in an infection into the organization. But what was interesting about it, and the sophisticated element about it, was when they landed into the organization and they gained access to the organization, they didn't do something immediately. They just lurked around. They dwelled to gain information about what's this organization about, who are the people, what are they talking about, where does the money go? And at some point, and it's not clear as to how long they spent in the organization before they launched their attack, but at some point they launched an attack and they got in between the investment fund and an intended recipient of $10 million, who I believe was a charity in Cambodia. And they actually impersonated an individual who would have been involved in that whole organizational transfer. And they impersonated that individual and ensured that the transfer happened to the scammer's bank account in Mexico. But the sophisticated piece of it on top of that was that they contacted the Cambodian recipients and said to them, we're sorry about the delay in the transfer, but we're having a few issues. So while we did say to you, you get your transfer, today or the next day, it might actually take a few weeks. So as a result of that, the intended recipient did not realize for a number of weeks that the money didn't come through. Therefore, they didn't alert Norfund for a number of weeks. And as a result, Norfund weren't able to reply or respond in a timely manner. So I don't know whether the money was recovered. But the criminals gave themselves a very good chance at keeping that money because of the time that it took for the scam to be revealed. And even the CEO of the organization, is quoted as saying, it was a wonderfully done scam, because they didn't just barge in there, start ransacking the place. They just came in, thought about things, saw what they could do, and then, executed a pretty good plan.
So while the initial infection, the initial attack was probably not a terribly sophisticated, something possibly through a phishing email, it did become quite sophisticated through the way that they were able to install themselves and listen for a period of time to get enough information to be able to then make an attack that was successful in this instance, because they were able to impersonate and get themselves in a position where money was transferred to them and give themselves enough time to get that money away before authorities were alerted.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, they gave themselves all they stacked the odds in their favor just by having patience. And like I say, the details of how it happened and all that, the timeline isn't revealed. But what would be interesting, and I suppose maybe from your perspective, is to think about what would the regulator do, if Norfund was an Irish regulated entity and they were to go to the central bank and say, we've had this incident. What would the regulator look for? What would they ask?
Well, I think the regulator, whether it's a financial regulator in Norway or Ireland or probably anywhere else, of course, the first questions are going to be around the kinds of steps that a regulated firm has taken to prevent them being subjected to a successful cyber attack. So what protocols have you in place? And then, of course, how well did you deploy those protocols? And what did you do to try and prevent? And was it reasonable or was it understandable the steps that you took, and that you weren't able to defend yourself successfully, notwithstanding that you had policies and procedures and protocols in place? They'd be interested in things like dwell time. So how did an organization manage to be penetrated and have somebody sit there silently for a period of time before they launched their attack? And how come that didn't get picked up? What was the mindset within the regulated firm that allowed that to happen? Did they proceed with a mindset that was everything is fine? Or were they kind of using a more negative mindset, a more pessimistic mindset, kind of assuming that somebody was in there lurking and always on the hunt for that infiltrator to try and root them out before they could launch that attack, haven't gotten in? So there's certainly the kinds of questions that the regulator is going to be interested in. And all of this happening for a firm after they've been subjected to a successful attack. And as you can imagine, under great amounts of stress, which that kind of attack brings to an organization, having had been infiltrated, possibly had monies dissipated that belong either to the firm or to clients. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, your reputation is on the line as well. So none of that is good news. On top of having a regulator, then I get very interested in how you go about protecting yourself from cyber attacks.
Okay, well, we've gone way over the 7 minutes, so we'll wrap it up there. Thanks, Danny.
Thanks, Sam.